Welcome everyone, Costini here with a discussion about racial variety in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. And in this particular video, I want to talk about a particular argument that quite a few people make in favor of weaker races being fine as the weak races. Some people would argue that, well, some races should have poor growth, casualty replenishment, and income. Some races should just play more defensive-oriented than offensive-oriented. Then not every race has to embrace the idea of offensive warfare, extreme aggressiveness. On that point of extreme aggressiveness, that is factually not true. Every race, with the exception of, to some extent, and only to an extent, the Wood Elves, every single race, the strongest, the weakest, every single legendary lord, the strongest and weakest within their respective races, will excel at campaign aggression. This is turn 38 as the Dwarves. This is the mighty Dwarven freaking Empire. I have allied the Empire. I have taken a huge portion of the Battlelands and the mountains. Queek is dead. Warzag is dead. Scarbrand is next. Tredge Craventail is dead. I'm marching on the Black Fortress to rescue Emmerich from Drazov. And the only potential threat that I have in this entire campaign, and literally because I just confederated Belegar, I still have his negative. The only real negative effect is the fact that I might end up losing one of the settlements over here to Ekaclaw with his 4 stacks. But it's not really a problem because I had a particular army over here taking the settlement, so I just used Underway to march over here, and I'm just going to take Belegar, these 2 armies, and smash through Ekaclaw with ease. This is not going to be difficult. The idea that certain campaigns are more difficult than others, or that it's fine for some of them to be slower paced than others. No campaign is slower paced than others. No campaign is necessarily going to be more defensive oriented than others, and no campaign is necessarily going to be harder than others. Having poor income growth, casualty replenishment, it doesn't change that calculus of aggression, of winning a campaign early on. The Dwarves are a great example. The Dwarves have horrible growth, horrible casualty replenishment, and while their income can be pretty good, like over here I'm generating almost 40,000 income by turn 40, while their income can be pretty good, the problem is they also end up spending a huge amount of money on various structures that they do construct. Because Dwarven structures, Dwarven units can be expensive. Sure, you can reduce costs by quite a significant amount as the Dwarves, but it's jumping through a lot of hoops that other races just do not need to do so. But difficult campaign, the Dwarves are not. There's no real difficult campaign if you know what you're doing. If you've spent a lot of time playing this game, then you might just be slowed down to some extent. But as any race, as any legendary lord, including the worst ones, you can win a campaign relatively quickly. And that is just an objective fact. Like, turn 38, I haven't just completed my short campaign victory condition. I am like 3-4 turns away from achieving the long campaign victory condition because I have multiple armies on multiple fronts doing so. Now, the reason aggression is so important, and let me just highlight this. The reason aggression is so important is aggression equals money, equals resources, equals experience for units and generals. And heroes as well. You will get higher rank heroes like this rank 14 engineer over here, this rank 25 engineer that I have here. I didn't manage to quite get the runesmith in Thorgrim's army. You will get significantly more power as any race, as any lord, through aggression. The only exception, as I stated, is the Wood Elves, and the only reason the Wood Elves are an exception is that they only care about the trees, and they only care, and they can get a bunch of events for free experience and money thanks to those trees. That is why they are an exception, not the rule. Everyone else, if you're not expanding aggressively, if you're playing passively, you will end up weaker for it. And just to be clear, this is a campaign that I've been playing legendary, very hard, only a couple, no racial mods, no warband mod, no recruit defeat and legendary lords mod, no remove public order penalty mod or anything like that. I have smashed through my opposition. However, because the dwarves have a bad growth, they have insufficient income, and they have bad casualty replenishment. This experience in this campaign has been miserable. That's the problem with poor growth, poor income, poor casualty replenishment. You end up having an annoying campaign experience that's vastly inferior to another campaign, like, say, the Greenskins. Because while I can certainly achieve a lot as the dwarves, if I'm willing to jump for the hoops needed, I can certainly achieve a heck of a lot more as the Greenskins. Like, if I was playing a Greenskin campaign, I'd be sitting on tier 5 capitals by this point. Whereas over here, even my initial capital, despite the fact this has a growth commandment, despite the fact it has a granary, I just haven't managed to upgrade it just yet, but despite the fact that I have a good amount of growth here, I haven't even managed to get it to tier 4. This is a problem. But let's talk about this, and how poor auto resolve, poor growth, poor income, poor casualty replenishment ends up screwing over campaigns and removing variety from the game, not adding to it. Because that's one of the comments that gets made. That's like, oh, it's more varied experience. No, it's not a more varied experience. It's an inferior experience to what you have. Like, you should notice here that my armies are made up primarily of quarrelers with some artillery. Grudge throwers. I can recruit cannons, but I just don't have the time needed to detach my troops from the front lines where they've been at constantly. I just don't have the time to detach my troops from the front lines to go retain cannons. Nor do I want to spend 2 turns on my ass just getting cannons on these particular armies. So I'm stuck with grudge throwers, which certainly get the job done. I do have a few cannons over here. The few that I actually, when I was recruiting this army, I did use some global recruitment to get these free cannons. But outside of that, for the most part. Now, cannons aside, the reason I have quarrelers en masse has to do with the issue of casualty replenishment and also the issue of auto-resolve. Yes, both these issues combined kill any kind of variety in a campaign. Like, if you want to play a campaign in a far less efficient way, absolutely go for whatever the hell you want, but that's not how I play the game. And most people will choose the path of least resistance. The reason poor casualty replenishment kills the idea of variety, and the reason poor auto-resolve kills variety in a campaign, is the fact that you're going to want, if you have poor casualty replenishment, which the dwarves absolutely do, you're going to want to minimize casualties. Guess what? That's where the quarrelers come in. Especially when siege battles, this is legendary very hard, siege battles in particular on walled settlements do inflict a severe amount of damage. Yes, there are mods that remove the auto-resolve benefit that settlements do have for both you and AI. Yes, there are auto-resolve mods that do it, but I'm talking the vanilla experience here. The problem is, you can go with a melee army as dwarves, but you're obviously going to take hundreds of casualties potentially in a lot of sieges. Or you can go with a full ranged army and take minimal, if any, casualties whatsoever in siege battles. The field battles are actually kind of an irrelevancy, because when you're playing a campaign, the great majority of battles that you will fight will be siege battles. It's also, by the way, absurdly stupid that Creative Assembly doubled HP of towers and walls and said that this was going to make siege battles more interesting for an attacker. It has quite the opposite effect, because with more HP on walls and towers, you're just funneling the player down a narrow choke point. You can win in a narrow choke point, but it pushes you more towards these kind of armies. Now, the reason behind this army can win field battles and siege battles, crucially, win minimal casualties. It takes multiple stacks of troops to be able to overcome the raw range firepower of a huge stack of artillery and quarrelers to even get close enough to do any damage. And here's the thing about quarrelers. While obviously they don't compare in melee to things like warriors, and obviously don't compare in melee compared to things like longbeards and hammerers, the reality is they're doing so much damage from range that by the time the enemy engages in melee with them, the fact that they have decent enough melee stats to hold their own is good enough. And that's how you use quarrelers. you corner camp or even deploy in the middle of the field. Depends if you're outnumbered 2-1. If you're 2-1, you want to corner camp because you'll just end up outflanked, or you want to use certain formations in order to draw the enemy into weak points and get obliterated. Pike and shot formations, those kind of things. So you can use various formations to minimize casualties. And when you have poor casualty replenishment, then you achieve a lot more in your campaign faster and become far stronger than that. If you play aggressively, then obviously you want to minimize the casualties. I am faction strength number 1 here. I am stronger than everyone else. The only person that compares to me is Grimgor, who's actually chilling over here in the mountains. Like, it seems he's wiped out Greasus. He's taken the mountains and more, and he's gonna be a big problem. He's probably looking to gear up in a war against Gorst or maybe me, depending on how he feels about it. So this kind of army composition minimizes losses. So everything else, every other unit in the Dwarven arsenal, the melee units, ranger units, even other like range units, just end up being pointless. A couple of Iron Drakes for the flamethrower effect, absolutely. But when we consider the Dwarven roster, there is no reason, with the exception of like emergency recruitment, to use any other of these units, with the exception of Quarrelers with grey weapons, and things like grudge throwers, cannons, and some organ guns later. Like late game, I would have like 2 cannons, 2 free cannons with 2 organ guns in our army, heroes, and a bunch of quarrelers. That is the best Dwarven army. The only exception is obviously when you confederate, because I've been confederating a lot. So Cazador, for instance, here has a decent number of melee units because, well, I'm busy. I've got things to do, places to be, Chaos Dwarfs to kill. I'm busy. I'm not going to sit on my ass and see the strategic initiative to Drazif when he's just finished wiping off Emmerich, or let him wipe off Emmerich. That would be a huge mistake in this particular campaign. And I control 47 settlements, 15 provinces. And I've traded away some provinces. Like I took Averland from Scrag, traded it to Gelt, for instance, in this campaign. I actually took portions of the Wolflands and Blastaland and traded for a peace treaty with these Greenskins after fighting a war with them. That's why they hate me so much. I beat the crap out of them. But it's like I figured, you know what, a buffer between me and Grimgor is probably worth not wiping those guys out. That was my perspective. You can't fight on every front on the same level. You got to decide. My priority was wiping Queek, wiping Warzag, now wiping Skarbrand. Once I'm finished with that, once that situation is sorted out and I can't expand further south, I'm going to take my 2 armies over here, 3 armies here, and I'm going to march east. And I'm going to throw 7 stacks against Grimgor, if I can. If Ikeclaw doesn't get in the way. Like, with the exception of these 2 armies who are going to deal with Ikeclaw, deal with Mogr, deal with Sartosa, take all of this bloody territory. And once they're done with that, who knows, maybe I should just go kill some elves. I don't know. In this particular campaign. But that's the issue of casualty replenishment and auto-resolve. The poor auto-resolve pushes you towards recruiting units that take less damage in auto-resolve. And that is a problem, because one of the issues that does come up with auto-resolve is the fact that if you have a variety, like if you have a mix of melee units and range units in an army, like Forgrim does start with some melee units, you'll recruit some melee units, and then obviously you want to get Quarrelers. If you have that kind of army, the melee units will always take more damage. And since your casualty replenishment is bad, yeah, that you just end up replacing the melee units with a simple army of Quarrelers. I just haven't gotten around to replacing Hammers, Gyro Bombers, and all that. Not that they're particularly useful. They're not useful at all in this situation. Like, just getting more Quarrelers or more artillery or more heroes over here would actually pay off more. Okay, what about the issue of growth? Because, well, people will argue that dwarves can recruit everything at tier 4. First off, it's turn 40, and I've certainly been, well, I haven't gone crazy on the growth, and I could have, and that's one of the issues that's annoying. Well, I could have gone crazy on the growth, and I didn't. The dwarves have poor casualty replenishment. They can get all their units at tier 4. True. Here's a reason why that doesn't work in a campaign. Poor growth is not just like, oh, you don't get to recruit the most powerful units. No, poor growth means you have more limited building slots, means your economy is more limited, means the kind of things you can recruit in each provinces are more limited. So a lot of your provinces are kind of going to end up looking something like this, or, you know, that's actually a bad case, but they're going to look like this. Income buildings, growth buildings, controlled buildings, and various income benefit buildings. So I've got a bunch of trading depots, I've got factories to keep control in order. To some extent, it's not perfect over here. But this is how your buildings will look like in a lot of your provinces. There are exceptions over here. I got a bunch of hero recruitment buildings in Karazak. Absolutely so. And once I get this to tier 4, I might just cancel this particular building. Or I might cancel the mustering hall and just get a hall of oaths and, you know, get the Karazak airfield, and also get another armory over here. Probably won't recruit rangers from this particular location. So having limited growth means you end up with fewer buildings, and since economy is important, you end up with less unit recruitment. You're already incentivized to recruit a lower variety of units in your campaign because of dot resolve and casualty replenishment situation. You combine that with growth, and you combine that, by the way, with insufficient income, because dwarven stuff is expensive. They might gain a good amount of money, though many other races that have cheaper units are vastly wealthier than they are. Like Bretonia actually makes more money. The Dark Elves make more money. And yeah, the Dark Elves and Bretonia spend significantly less money than you on structures and units. But when we're looking at the situation of growth and income, the issue of having poor growth, insufficient income, it limits your choices. It doesn't make for a varied campaign experience. It just means that individual races are worse than others. The campaign experience is more limited than others. Now, dwarves do have a roster issue. Their roster hasn't really been updated since King and the Warlord. That's how long we've waited for any kind of new dwarven units to come into play. Sure, we got a couple of fixes, Fork and all that, but when we're thinking about like roster changes, they haven't really been coming for years and years. This is one of the issues. This is why the dwarves are not fine, because many races have gotten roster updates, have gotten more units, have gotten a better experience. The dwarves have remained the same that they've been for over half a decade. That is the issue, because they could really use some monstrous units, they could use some flying units. But right now, in the dwarven campaign, because of growth, income, casualty replenishment, not resolve, even the limited roster is not worth recruiting. So just adding more shit on this pile is not going to change a damn fucking thing. If, like, just recruiting Quarrelers, maybe a couple of Bugman's Rangers. Like, okay, here's your dwarf army variety. You recruit Quarrelers with great weapons if you have a tier 2 barracks. If you start with tier 1 barracks, you recruit Dwarf Warriors and Miners with blasting charges until you get tier 2. Once you get tier 2, Quarrelers with great weapons, as well as grudge throwers. Later on, you spice it up a bit. You get cannons and organ guns, a couple of those. You never bother with flame cannons. You might get a couple of iron drakes, but basically, your entire army variety is made up of 4 units, infantry-wise, and maybe 3 artillery units. Everything else, the entire melee tree, the entire flying war machine tree, utterly pointless. Iron Drakes are not the bad unit, but they're sure as shit not worth recruiting. I'd rather get another Quarreler. I'd rather get another Artillery. I'd rather get another Iron Drake in an army than an Iron Breaker in an army. Just saying that. So basically, you end up in the situation where even the limited roster, there's not worth using. Like basic Rangers with great weapons, not worth a damn. Thunderers, well, Gunpowder units suck, so fuck Thunderers. So Quarrelers, couple of Iron Drakes, very limited amounts, and then if you want to spice things up, just for a variety of it, specifically with a Thane hero. The reason is a Thane hero can get the Wanderer, so he can get Snipe for Ranger units in an army. You get a bunch of Rangers, specifically on Belegar's army, and you get a bunch of Bugman's Rangers. That is the Dwarven variety. 4 ranged units, 3 artillery units. That's a great level of variety. And people wonder why I dislike playing the dwarves. It is so boring. Now, I can give you counter examples of, like, even the Empire, for all its issues, the Empire may have more variety, because you would get great weapons, you would get crossbowmen, you would get huntsmen, you would get artillery types of artillery, like you would hellstorms and rockets, absolutely, in a campaign, but you might get mortars on a wagon, for instance, or hellblasters. You might get all those unique units that the Empire can get from the electric counts, because quite a few of them are worth getting. Or if you're playing a vampire count campaign, you can get all the infantry unit, the variety of monsters, and they all have a particular purpose. And because you're using the raise dead mechanic, yeah, you got to balance things out between power and how much your economy can sustain as the vampire counts. Having better income, more money, better mechanics leads to greater variety than if you have bad combat economy, bad growth, bad auto-resolve, bad casualty replenishment. And that is the issue of the dwarves. They're just not a really fun race to play in a lot of ways, and it really shows. And hopefully this will all change in Thrones of Decay. But it's not just the dwarves. I want to point this out. It's not just the dwarves. I harp on a lot about Skarbrand because his campaign has the same issues, with the exception of like casualty replenishment. He has an auto-resolve issue, unless you're using masses of Chaos Warriors. So if you're playing a Skarbrand campaign, the best thing you can do is get masses of Chaos Warriors. Basic Chaos Warriors, not the ones with dual weapons, just masses, entire stacks, if you can even afford stacks. And never use anything else, because that will give you the best auto-resolve situation. You can get good casualty replenishment as Skarbrand. Your economy is not worth a damn, so you're not even going to use all the demonic units and all that, because you can't afford them. And with the exception of like getting them potentially from a blood host, and that's about it. And yeah, I think that Skarbrand's campaign variety is pretty crap from that perspective. And we can look at other factions as well, like the Demon Prince has this issue of campaign variety, of having poor campaign variety available. Where some races may have a good roster of units that they can use throughout the course of the campaign. For instance, Kislev does actually have a decent number of units, but Kislev just doesn't have the economy to support all those units, and so you end up in this kind of situation where you just use armored Kossars and regular Kossars, and that's kind of the best army you're going to get, or along with Patriarchs. At least you can get a good AR, and you can get a good CR, good auto-resolving casualty replenishment as Kislev, but yeah, the limited economy does really show itself. Or ogres. Holy crap. There's so much fun that could be had in an ogre roster, but it's like you're just so screwed because of the economic potential that the ogres do have. So this kind of situation repeats itself again and again and again. And some people want to argue in favor of this. I think it's utter nonsense from my perspective. Good campaign variety exists when the baseline mechanics work well. The best races, Greenskins, Dark Elves, Cast Dwarves, they don't play the same. They all have potentially good income. Cast Dwarves are kind of in a weird situation, actually, because they don't deal with growth, they may not generate a lot of money, but they certainly are really powerful. But not absurdly overpowered. They won't steamroll the map in the way that Warriors of Chaos do. They have to kind of work for it. But when we're looking at Dark Elves and Greenskins, you might think, oh, they both have great growth, good casualty replenishment, potentially good auto-resolve, depending on how you build their armies. Yeah, but they play so very differently. And that's what's important. That's where real variety comes from. Having a good baseline of income, growth, casualty replenishment, auto-resolve leads to greater variety in campaigns than if you don't have it. Because you end up playing the Dwarves and your armies look like this. Or even the Empire, which I said they have a good variety, but in reality, if you're playing an Empire campaign, you just want to get as many crossbowmen or huntsmen and as many warrior priests as possible in your armies, and that's your variety, if you will, in your campaign. Because there's other reasons, like it's kind of weird with the Empire. The Empire is a different kettle of fish, actually. The Empire, a lot of the Empire roster is kind of crap, so you end up not using a lot of units because they're not worth recruiting, and you end up limited to the few good units the Empire does have in their roster. Cavalry, huntsmen, some artillery, and yeah, warrior priests. And you just mass them, as many as you can. Also, Imperial Authorities, piece of crap. Questine signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.